In this video, I'm going to cover the case study of Singapore. Okay, in the previous video, we learned about France and assimilation. In this video, we're going to learn how Singapore deal with people of different culture and what is integration, Singapore's method all about. Okay, so France is assimilation, Singapore is integration. Okay, so as you watch this video, it will be helpful for you to have this copy, your notes on integration. Okay, it should be part 2 lah, not part 1. Okay, on integration, and I will jump back and forth between the slides and the notes because I highlighted some things in the notes that I think will be important for you to take note of. Okay, and the words in red are already filled in. I gave you these notes. I believe I already filled in the notes. Okay, so what is Singapore's integration about? So remember, France has a policy called the assimilation. In case you need a recap, okay, I will pull it out. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, France has a method called assimilation where they expect people who are different cultures to blend in and follow the majority and look exactly like the majority in culture. Okay, maybe you cannot change your skin color, all this, but in terms of your practices, what you believe, what you say, what languages you use, what food you eat, France expects everyone to follow French culture. But in Singapore, we look at integration. It is a slightly different approach. Same thing, we have different people or different culture. So we have Chinese, Malay, Indian. We have people who are Singaporean. We have people who are not Singaporean, who are migrants to the country. Whoever you are, whatever background you are, we want you to be similar and yet different at the same time. So you can see everyone, you're expected to have something in common, like the red parts, but you get to keep a bit of your unique identity. So if you are, say, American, if you come to Singapore to live, you are expected to adopt some of Singaporean culture, but at the same time, you can keep some of the American culture. If you are Muslim in Singapore, you want to have something in common with everyone else, but you get to also keep your Muslim culture, for example. All right, so this is the key difference between integration. In integration, there's a shared identity, something in common, and yet you can retain unique aspects of their own identity. So this is very important. Okay, in the notes you see I also highlight that this is very important. So you want to take note. This is basically like the definition of integration. Okay, so the next part we're going to cover more about how does Singapore practice integration using these various policies. Okay, so I'm going to jump back and forth between the slide and the notes. The first thing we're going to cover is the bilingual policy. Okay, so in the bilingual policy, okay, all you need to know is, just now we said you must have something in common and something in different. So the common language that we know in Singapore, everyone is expected to learn English. Okay, bilingual means basically two languages. So you are supposed to learn English, but at the same time, you are allowed to keep your differences through your mother tongue. So if I'm a Chinese, I learn English and I learn Chinese. If I'm Malay, I learn English also, but I get to keep my learning Malay and keep a bit of my culture. You learn English so that you can communicate with one another. You learn and keep your mother tongue so that you can preserve your very different identity. So that is where Singapore starts to look very different from France. If Singapore wants to follow France directly, everyone will be learning English, full stop. Or worse, everyone will be learning Chinese because Singapore got a lot of Chinese. That's the majority language, majority culture. Okay, so in Singapore, no, we have two languages, the bilingual policy. In your notes, okay, I annotated, okay, you can write down, it means speak two languages. English is what they share and have in common. Mother tongue is what is different, so that people get to keep their different identity. Okay, I'm going to cover the next thing, which is called the Presidential Council on Minority Rights. I don't think I covered this in class a lot, but basically, you just need to know that this is a group of people that advises the president. That's why it's called the Presidential Council. Advises the president of Singapore just to check that any law passed by the Singapore Parliament, the Parliament is basically the government, they make sure that whatever the government choose to do not discriminate any racial or religious group. So you can see, for example, some of the advisors, they are religious people. Like we have a priest here, we have what looks like a Muslim imam and a Sikh, maybe a Sikh master. Okay, I don't really know their names, but basically they are advising the president just to make sure that everyone gets to keep a little bit of their own identity: the blue, the purple, the green, the yellow bits, that gets to keep a bit of your racial and religious rights. Okay, so that is the Presidential Council of Minority Rights. Minority refers to maybe your minority religions and so on. Okay, this is the example that I covered in class. Okay, another way we make sure that different cultural groups, different races gets protected in Singapore is to make sure that they are represented in the Singapore Parliament. And this is done through the group representation constituency system. Okay, what does this system means? It means that when you want to run for elections, okay, your team must have at least one candidate in a minority group. That means in your team, you can have a lot of Chinese, but you must have at least one Malay or maybe one Indian in the team, so that whoever wins the party, whether it's the PAP or the opposition party, they make sure that there will always at least be a minority, Malay or Indian, in the government. Because if they do not set this rule, chances are a lot of Chinese will come together and run, and we might not have Malays and Indians in the government, because Chinese, they are the majority, many of us, okay, and they may not want to form teams with Malay and Indians, and as a result, can you imagine all the government are all Chinese, and how would the Malays and Indians feel? They'll feel very unfairly treated. They may feel like no one is representing me, and they feel discriminated. So this is the GRC, or the Group Representation Constituency. Okay, this is for choosing who's in the government, making sure that there's minority. Okay, if you look in the notes, it's the same thing. I didn't really add anything here. So you can take a read at it. I'm going to move on to the next policy, which is quite important. It's the Ethnic Integration Policy, also known as the EIP. Okay, so basically, this we are talking about the red part. Just now we said in Singapore, you get to keep your own differences, but we also need to have a policy to make sure that everyone has something in common. Just now when you talk about bilingual policy, English is the red color part. Everyone learns English. That's what we have in common. What the EIP, or the Ethnic Integration Policy, does is make sure everyone, whether you are a different culture, you get to stay close together and learn to interact with one another and learn to become like one another. Okay, so for example, in the HDB, they make sure there is always a balanced ethnic mix. Basically, in the HDB, there must always be Chinese, Malay, and Indian in the correct proportion, in the correct ratio. So like 70% Chinese, 20% Malay, 10% Indian, roughly like what the population ratio is. This is to give them a chance to interact and build racial harmony, and very important, build up the common thing they have, the red color. Okay, so you can imagine speaking English. If all the Chinese all live in one HDB block, all the Malays choose to live in one HDB block, they may never have the chance to, use their English and build up the common culture with one another. That's why the HDB, they came out with this policy to make sure different races are living together in a close proximity, so that they can interact and build up the common culture. All right. Okay. So ethnic integration is for housing. It's for people to share their culture and interact with one another and foster racial harmony. Okay. I'm going to skip the rest of the parts because I think this is a bit long-winded. Okay, so I think I given enough example lah. But this one I mentioned in class also. Okay, in your notes, maybe you can take this down. Okay, besides making sure that there are different races, I also have this quota in HDB that is introduced to make sure that there are non-Malaysian Singapore permanent residents buying HDB flat also. Okay, because you need to know that for HDB flats, all right, um, citizens and PRs can buy the HDB flats. Your PR may not be your Chinese, Malay, or Indian. Your PR could be an American. Your PR could be from Europe. Your PR could be an African. Okay, so we want to make sure that when we do the ethnic integration policy, we make sure that there's Chinese, Malay, Indian in the correct quota, but we also make sure that there are there are other PRs who are not Chinese, Malay, Indian that also get to stay together in the HDB flat. This is so that citizens and PRs can also get to interact, because we want the PRs to slowly learn about Singapore culture, live with Singaporeans, and slowly pick up the Singapore culture, including things like learn how to eat Singapore food, maybe learn how to speak a bit of Singlish, things like that, so that they have something in common. Okay, and the other way they make sure different people pick up the common culture for guys, especially, is in national service. If you are a male Singaporean, you are going to live together for 2 years and work together for 2 years, and they learn to have a common experience in NS. Remember just now I talked about integration, right? If you are different in Singapore, the guys come together in the army, they learn to build up something in common. They have a common culture. They have a common desire to defend Singapore. They have the same belief to want to defend Singapore. So that is the red part that they have in common. And with that, I shall sum up. That is the policy of integration in Singapore, very different from France's method of assimilation. Okay, so that is the two countries and how we deal with the differences in culture in the country. All right, so that's two case study. In the next two videos, I'll talk more about how does Singapore and the USA deal with differences in SES. People who are different income, how do we help and make sure different income can deal with the healthcare problem? Okay, so that is the next video. I'll end off here. Bye bye.